I'd say that was a pretty exciting time. I think it went from uncertainty at the end of '84 to people being really excited when they found out that Jack had leased the racetrack and the Stafford team was coming down to take the place over.
It was a big sigh of relief. It was a surprise in a way, because the Arutes were so committed to Stafford. That was their baby. And a lot of times if you've got one really successful thing like that, you don't want to branch out and do something else. I think they did it partly because they knew that to have 3 viable tracks at that, without Danbury and Plainville, you were down to Thompson, Stafford, and Waterford. Well, if you lose one, now you're down to 2. I think the Arutes knew that there was strength in numbers, whether you ran the track or not. And if nobody else was going to run it, or if there was a chance nobody else was going to run it, that maybe they ought to jump in and do something. And I think they, I don't think it was purely humanitarian. I think, Jack and his son Jackie and the whole family were smart enough to know that the numbers had to make sense.
I was excited because I knew our team from Stafford was coming down here. And I thought that was cool, the coolest thing in the world.
Jack Arute must have felt pretty highly of him if he was moving him up through the ranks of helping him promote the events.
I knew Ed Yarrington, I knew the Arutes, and I knew they ran a first-class operation at Stafford.
Ed doesn't come close to getting the credit that he should get for the role that he's played in local racing. Ed had a reputation for being a tough guy, that he was tough to deal with, and that's not true.
He was strict, very fair though. Very, very fair. No favorites at all. There was no such thing as a favorite at Yarrington. But you had to go by the rules. There was no funny going on or anything like that.
Ed put a lot of physical labor. You go down there early in the day and he'd be down there with his shirt off, raking stuff out or shoveling stuff. I mean, Ed put a lot of physical effort into that too.
What kind of guy was Dan McCarthy?
Excellent guy. Very smart.
Danny not only knew the business, he was extremely adept at the technical side of the business. Danny also knew a lot about the psychology of the guys in the pits.
And funny. He was always cracking jokes all the time.
He had the quickest wit of any man I've ever met in my life.
Just a funny guy.
He had Bruce Watt as a tech man. He had Ed Moody as a tech man, or assistant tech man. And he had a lot of good key people.
It had a whole different feel to it.
They brought the same officials from Stafford down to Waterford.
They had pit stewards. They had tech people for the individual divisions. There was a lot of people walking around, all dressed up, looking good. They brought their professionalism in there.
People took it more serious. It had, it was new, breathed some new life into it.
I think everybody welcomed it because they knew it was going to maybe be the salvation.
With Stafford came the NASCAR sanction.
I think the branding, the NASCAR brand actually brings fans in. Because the other guys like Dick Williams had Coastal Racing and White House had Independent Racing and then you had United Racing. There was no real, unless you were a big fan and knew, but to a casual person on the street and they go, oh, NASCAR, okay. I heard of that. I don't know if they're disappointed and they go there and Richard Petty isn't there, but because I don't know that. But
there's a positive side to having NASCAR sanctioning your racetrack. They get information, procedural information, safety information from their 4 big series plus 60 tracks around the country that they whittle down to a general set of rules and divisional rules. From a safety point of view, they're getting a lot of feedback, and obviously it can help your individual racetrack program. But from a competitor point of view, other than bragging that you have, you're racing for a NASCAR racetrack, I don't know.
Well, at the time, I didn't think it was anything that we needed. It was just another expense, buying the NASCAR license.
It doesn't bring everything that, they say as far as for the competitors and the car owners and stuff.
I was in favor of it, and in looking in hindsight, it's nothing but good. NASCAR brings a fan base, they bring cars, they bring money.
When Winston was involved with NASCAR, there were a lot of incentives, there were a lot of perks, there was a lot of assistance from Winston.
If you were a NASCAR sanctioned racetrack, you got a scoreboard. That's how that worked.
Winston paid for scoreboards at all tracks. They'd paint, too.
One thing you got back then with a NASCAR sanction were buckets and buckets and buckets of red, yellow, and white paint.
They would give you paint and stuff to paint, as long as it's red and white. In the motif of a Winston pack, they would supply you with the paint to paint the walls. They would paint all the handicapper booths and concession stands and the parking lots.
Everything was painted red, white, and yellow. So the place had a different look when it opened for that season.
They spruced the track up and did what they could.
It was because of Winston, the series sponsor. There was a big influx of cash, so to speak, that helped the racetrack. And a place like Waterford, it really helped spiff it up.
They had an in gate that's now gone.
There were 2 pit gates on the backstretch. One for coming off and the other one for going back on.
Cars came off turn 2 and went in through an in gate into the pits. There was no turn 1 and 2 pits back then at all, because you didn't have all the other divisions of race cars.
They closed that one up and they made a new on what is now the on-ramp in the 4th turn.
The turn 4 gate, as you see it right now, that was put in '85 when Jack Arute leased the racetrack. The cars used to come on in turn 3.
We found out relatively quickly that it was going to become an SK track in '85.
And Stafford was kind of in flux then. The weekly modified count at Stafford was down. And it started going down, I think, around '84.
Jack wanted the SK Modifieds to be the top division. So that's why Jack decided to lease Waterford.
It was done for the right reason, and it was done as a cost-cutting measure.
Ricky, if I'm not mistaken, at the time was driving for Teddy Marsh. And so I think you had a lot of local knowledge helping a kid that obviously had raw talent.
He was an intimidating person, but in a very friendly way. The night before we were at Stafford, and I hadn't won. I mean, I've been racing since '73, and I haven't won a race. So I said to Tony, he was there, happened to be there that night, and I said to him, I said, before you won your first race, did you ever wonder that second was the best you're ever gonna do? Are you never gonna win? He goes, let me tell you something. He goes, yeah, you feel that way, but after you win your first one and you go a while without winning your next one, you start saying, well, am I a one-hit wonder? Am I ever gonna win again? And it's he said, but don't worry, you know, it'll come. And I won the next night. So it's kind of cool. And it was a 100 lapper the first race I won. It was the first 100 lap SK race ever too, anywhere.
When they first went to SK racing, the cars were considered a lot slower, but now they're a lot faster than the modifieds were. When they're all going the same speed, it's good side-by-side racing. You don't notice that.
I think that they were receptive to it. I'm not going to say everybody liked it.
My car, the 2 previous years, had an open modified motor in it. I find out that my home track is shutting that whole program down and I got to run a stock 350. I sold my engine to a guy in Virginia and I sold my chassis to Jay Stuart. I didn't plan on going back in 85 because I didn't want to race one of those cars. That's just how I felt. And obviously, many, many years later, I embraced the SK division. But at that point in time, I was a little upset that we weren't going to have a mod division to race. And I didn't want any part of it.
Believe me, going in 1985, going to Waterford for the first year and running SKs wasn't my cup of tea, you know. I mean, I like racing with full-blown modifieds. I mean, that's the way it was.
The SK started out with a lot of kind of like older, not has-beens, but, you know, guys who were on the way down, so to speak.
Back then, the guys that ran at Waterford were going to stay at Waterford pretty much.
The only reason I went back and started the 85 season, Jay Stewart asked me to drive the car after he bought it from me.
Well, it was Tommy's car. He ran modifieds for a couple of years, and they switched to SK modified. And I said, well, I can probably afford to do that. So we sold the motor and built an SK motor.
So I went and I raced it for 4 or 5 weeks.
We broke 3 wrecks in like 5 weeks. They're different cars, they're expensive. I really had trouble trying to afford that. So we did it for a while, but I didn't stay with it long, probably till about 86 or so, and then we sold the car.
It was pretty exciting back then because the Modified Tour then had a pretty good car count.
The great thing about the Modified Tour in 85 through, you know, maybe through 90 or so, was you really had certain tracks that had real home field advantages. And Waterford was very much like that.
They brought a lot of cars, there was a lot of excitement, big crowds.
Packed the grandstand. Cars from all over.
And there was a buzz about the first tour race. You know, it was exciting to have that happen at your local racetrack.
I don't think anybody was doubtful that Ricky would have speed in that race.
You take anybody's home track that's racing and you know, they move up to the tour division, they definitely have an advantage on their home front.
I have a clear memory of the Miller one because he was driving for Billy Simons. Right. And that was cool because the car had so much local history.
Gentlemen, start your engine. Well, there we have it. First SCI, 100 rounds finished. Of course, Mike McLaughlin picking up his first ever win here in the Waterford Speedbowl, doing it throughout a convincing style as he led throughout the entire event.
Jimmy had a habit of putting his foot in his mouth back then. He's outspoken even now, which is one of the things people like about him. But when you're young and you're on your way up and you say things like that, and when you're not from that track, you know, it's natural that anybody, any local is going to take any kind of a comment like that personally.
Jimmy destroyed the place. I was pissed. We got a packed grandstand of people who we'd like to see come back next week. And you're killing us. And I mean, he killed us bad.
I mean, Waterford was really getting to the point where it was rough. I mean, really rough.
It was, you know, grass growing up through the cracks. You got there early and it was all green stripes all over the track. And as the day wore on, you'd see where the groove was just because there was no grass there anymore.
And he's just one of many that openly criticized the condition.
Was there like resentment towards him for?
No, not really. It was Jimmy Spencer.
But that's Jimmy Spencer.
You know, Jimmy Spencer's Jimmy Spencer. He's going to, if he wins the NASCAR championship, he's still going to tear something up. So
that's just Jimmy Spencer. It's, you know.
To me, it's always a little, if you're the guy that won, you should probably just take your lumps and cash your check and get on the road. But Jimmy has never been afraid to, he's never worried about rubbing people the wrong way.
It was really hyped up a lot. this enduro happening that was going to go on.
Oh my God, that was huge. When they announced that they were going to do that.
That was my first experience in a race car. I was running an Enduro at Waterford.
I started in Enduros. I was in the I drove in the very first 2 Enduros.
I helped Rob Janovic get a car ready for the first Enduro. Lettered it for him.
Dennis Gada came down, made me numbers, right? So we, made vinyl numbers and everything, painted the car up and everything, and I went Enduro racing. That was my race car. I was so proud of that car.
They didn't have any cages in them at all.
All you had to have was a seatbelt and a helmet.
Oh, yeah, God. I think I had water pipe for a roll cage, and, it was nothing special. It was just to take the windows out and all the interior and go racing.
Wire the doors shut, and you had to take out all the windows and, all the glass and the lights. Other than that, it was just a stock car.
Yarrington put on an Enduro race and no place to park. They were parking all over the place.
They had cars parked up on 395 alongside the highway, all the way down the ramp and all the way to the racetrack.
I parked it was Ralph Strong Motorcycles back then. It's Yost Home Improvement now. I had to park there and walk to the track.
So nobody knows what to expect. This is all brand new, right?
It was the first real Enduro they had there, so yeah, nobody really knew what they were going to see.
So everybody's all excited. We show up for this Enduro, and I just could not believe how many cars were there. It was just unbelievable.
I've never seen that many people packed into the Speedbowl in my life.
The place was packed. The car count was ridiculous. Cars were cheap back then.
Well, those Enduros were insane. They had 300 cars when we first started. And if you got there early, you could start in the first row or first few rows, and that was good.
All I remember is there were 3 wide almost all the way around the racetrack.
And there were so many cars on the track, you almost couldn't move.
I mean, they were 3/4 of the way around the track.
But then we took off. By the time you get to turn 1, the back of the pack hadn't even moved yet.
They were lapping cars before they ever even got started.
They threw the green, and I was still sitting there when the leaders went by. I hadn't even moved yet.
The front cars just thought up with the back cars right there.
There wasn't a space on the track. They were doing like maybe 10 miles an hour for half the race until some of the cars go.
I think like the average speed of that race was probably like 16,
No red flags, no caution flags. They waved the green flag.
And then throw the checkered flag. And there was cars wrecked, blocking the infield.
Short of flames, they didn't stop it for anything.
They would stop it for a fire. But other than that, they weren't stopping for any crashes.
Remember the huge fire during that race, where 3 cars got together on the backstretch, and there was like an inferno back there.
It wasn't a regular racer, so you knew it could be dangerous. Nothing happened. Nobody got hurt.
That was when it was real Enduro racing. I mean, you'd have 6 cars piled on top of each other, and everybody's driving around them.
I'd zigzag through them, and guys would be sitting there for 10 or 15 laps, and all of a sudden somebody would go crash into them.
And it was just chaos. Car parts flying everywhere.
You're just driving around just piles of cars. It was just awesome.
They didn't stop the races. You sat in your car.
Dirt flying everywhere. You couldn't see anything.
It was a demolition derby going around the track.
It was pretty much a free-for-all. It was wild.
It was good practice. I mean, you had to avoid cars and bumpers and gas tanks. And
did you learn anything driving those?
No. Only if you're mad at somebody, you know what I mean? The only thing you learn in there is how to hit people.
Before I drove my own car, Mike Dagnall and Earl Passmore owned a car. Big Mike ran a Spirit of 76 car.
Brian would hang around once in a while. And one day we were talking about driving.
And they were all having coffee one day, and they had some conversation that put Brian in the car. And Mike says, I'll put him in the car. I was just some little pit crew kid.
That if I let him drive his car, he would go as fast as I could go. So there was a bunch of people standing around. So a couple of people bet him. I think Al Goodrow might have been in on that.
And Al Goodrow said, oh, you'll scare the pants off him. He'll be having to change his clothes when he comes back in the pits. And the rule was Mike had to go around as fast as he could. And whatever he got in a stopwatch, I had to be within 1 second.
Like I was going maybe, I don't know, maybe a 19 second or I was going 20 and he had to go 21 or whatever it was. He went out in the warm-ups and on the third lap he did it.
And I'm like, no. I said, I know I could have went faster. They're like, you were within the time. So I was 0.3 of a second off his fastest time he ever turned in his life. And I never drove a race car, so it just came natural to me. It was like easy.
Brian was different. He always had the attitude that he could do more than everybody else. He was the character, but he was always good looking. He was young. One of his favorite saying was that I'm jello and I'm hard to hold on to. You could grab me, but you couldn't hold on to me. And it was more pointed towards the girls.
Ladies' man. I mean, he'd get up in the morning and go to breakfast with his fire suit on.
Him and his fire suit, I think they might have something going there.
He was really good. He was really fast. Brian was accused a lot of being a dirty driver. He really wasn't. Brian was a pest.
I would terrorize you. You didn't want me around. But I wouldn't wreck you. I didn't spin people out to win a race. I didn't try to turn them around. I would lean against you. I was brutal. I'd be anywhere but where you wanted me to be. And it worked for me. But I wouldn't dump you or spin you out in the last lap or something. We'd trade paint though. A lot.
He had a completely different driving style than everybody else had. Just go sideways through the turns.
Brian sideways.
Sideways Brian.
Sideways through the corners.
He was more sideways than straight. He didn't know how to drive straight.
Brian was one of those guys that you either loved him or you hated him. I think everybody kind of concentrated on Brian back then. It was kind of a given that that's who you had to beat.
He was, I almost want to say, an insane racer. I really enjoyed seeing McCarthy race.
He knew there was a show. Spin that tire coming around the turn. They'd be thinking, isn't that burning your tire out? But he knew people were looking, almost waving out the window every lap. So he knew he was a star.
With his white gloves on, that's right. That's right.
He invented the Tokyo Drift. He just didn't know it. And if anybody could have explained to him what bite was, he'd have won 180 more races.
Brian McCarthy had a little secret because he was always loose rear, right? And that right rear was smoking. As soon as they'd have a caution, he'd drive down in the grass. By the time they ran at night, the grass was wet and dewy, and it cooled them tires off and it made it hot as a rock. He'd go back out there. Well, when they finally realized what he was doing, they told me he couldn't do that anymore.
I don't think Brian needed a championship to be regarded as a force in that division.
I was more after the wins. I've never been a points runner. I gave up after that. I gave up trying to be track champion. I just went for wins. The wins paid more money. That year I wasn't out for points either. However the points fell at the end of the year, they fell. Just give me the steering wheel. I'm going to the front one way or another. I'm going to the front. And I'm not going to wreck somebody to do it. I may terrorize you, but I'm not going to wreck you.
He's a showman. He understands how important it is for those fans to feel like they got their money's worth. And he also did drive sideways all the time.
And I think that driving style probably bit him, later on in his career. But, with the late models when he was running them, it didn't hurt you.
He was one of the guys that just really, I think, put the fannies in the seats at the Speedbowl every week.
Speedbowl was good to me. You know, I enjoyed it.
Whatever he got in was entertainment. McCarthy really knew how to put on a show. He just loved to race. You could tell by the style that he raced at. Just burning off the right rear and all that smoke and everything. Yeah, he was a blast.
Brian was worth the price of admission by himself. He really was.
We had a few rule changes. We got racing tires during that time. I think the motors, they upgraded a little bit. I think eventually we ended up all 3 tracks the same rules.
Well, my dad was running at one point 3 different tracks with basically the same car.
The best deal that I went into was when they had the tri-track.
Right around the same time that Stafford threw the modifieds out.
Stafford, Waterford, and Thompson had all the same rules.
Back then, the cars had the same rules. I think that was awesome.
Rules were going to stay the same, and you were able to go to any track and race.
Tri-Tac Series was Stafford, Thompson, and Waterford, where drivers accrued points for racing in X number of events at the 3 racetracks: Stafford Friday, Waterford Saturday, Thompson Sunday.
To me, the best years of the SK Modified division were when Stafford, Thompson, and Waterford were all cooperating in that tri-track series.
And there were points for the whole 3, besides the individual track champions, there was a tri-track champion.
I thought that was the best thing since sliced bread.
Really?
Gave everybody a chance to race.
Earliest memory, again, general family, enjoying racing at an early age. Thing I remember, oddly enough, is my dad at one point saying to us that one day he would own the track. Wow. Which, of course, back then, whatever.
Right.
The KORTEWEG'S were a very good friend of mine. I knew the KORTEWEG boys when they were young boys.
The 2 KORTEWEG'S, well, Wayne KORTEWEG was originally a quarter midget racer, and Danny got to be the starter.
I got my start doing quarter midgets after I was not racing anymore. As a family going every week to the Speedbowl, I just kind of thought, hey, that would be kind of cool, to do. I don't remember who the assistant was, but I remember the assistant was not there for a couple of weeks. So I actually went up to Frankie Scambato Jr., who was the starter back then, and just walked up to him after the races and said, hey, Frankie, I'm Dan. Notice that your assistant hasn't been here for a few weeks, and would love the opportunity to give it a shot. He actually had me go talk to Dick Williams. And so after talking to Dick, he said, no, Frank makes that decision. So I went back to Frankie, and Frankie basically said, bring your white clothes, your pants, and your shirt, and if my guy doesn't show up, you got the job. That's exactly what happened. So it was really cool. I always admired his father, Frank Sr. He made Stafford for me. He was, before we knew Jack and Mark and the Arutes, he made Stafford special because of the way he waved the flags, and actually tried to emulate that a little bit over the years. So
I was over there one night sitting in the stands with Norma, Mrs. KORTEWEG. I said, "Where's George?" He's down counting people coming through the gate. So he knew that he wanted to buy the place.
It was around that time I said, gee, I'd like to own this place and make the changes that were necessary. It was pretty run down.
I think there was just a little bit of confusion when the Arutes were there, because it was like, is this a long-term thing, a short-term thing? Are they serious about this?
Did you think that they were going to buy the track?
Yeah, there was talk, Air Yarrington had said it, Danny Pardee had said it, they were in negotiations to buy the track. Jack had big plans for it in his mind. Every time you talk to him, he was going to do this, going to do that, and redo the pits, he was going to actually put the pits out into the parking lot like he did at Stafford. Because remember at Stafford they were on the backstretch and he put them out into the parking lot so the fans could walk around the gate and see the cars. And he was thinking about doing that at the Speedbowl.
In fact, at the last drivers' meeting, Yarrington was talking about it. I remember it. And he said, we're going to be opening on such and such a date in '88.
Rumor was that they were going to buy the place, and then that didn't happen, and the KORTEWEG stepped up in some fashion.
This lawyer by the name of John Holstein from Mystic was also involved in it, and I think he was kind of the silent partner.
And he put together the consortium that, with Holstein and company, that they did buy the place.
Spent a lot of bucks putting it together, and it was worth it.
That was a real shocker. All of us expected Ed and his team and Jack to be back, for '88.
And even Harvey had told me, he said one time we were sitting there and he goes, I would have liked to seen the Arutes get it because the place would have really went somewhere, I think.
I can tell you that I never heard the name KORTEWEG until they had it.
It's kind of like, okay, we've got a bunch of race fans taking over a racetrack. What's going to happen here? Danny was an assistant starter at the racetrack. That's about all anybody knew.
I never met his father or his brother until they bought it.
I hadn't heard of them prior to them taking over the track.
People knew who Dickie Williams was. People obviously knew who the Arutes were. When Harvey came back, everybody knew who he was. It's a small community, no matter if you're talking about 100 different racetracks. Everybody kind of knows everybody or knows somebody who does know them. I didn't know a thing about those guys when they came in, and your first reaction was to worry about it because you did know the Arutes. It was like, oh my God, you're losing a known for an unknown. And in that climate of, mid-'80s, late '80s racetracks closing, it's like, oh my God, I hope this works out. And it did. I mean, they came in and they were an instant spark to the place.
I had a pretty good job, I think. I would drive the pace car, so I probably, the years that I did that, led the most laps those years. I would provide the trophy girl every week, so I got the fun job of finding, hopefully, an attractive woman that wanted to ride around with a crown and a sash.
Definitely when the KORTEWEG'S ran it, definitely a family vibe.
A little bit more laid back.
It had a family feel, obviously. It wasn't as professionally run. There weren't as many people. Not that it was a bad thing with the KORTEWEG'S, but it was just the three of them.
The father was more involved with the grandstands, the food. He tried to improve the food.
Concession stand was my little thing. We put in a soft ice cream machine. Every night we'd clean out the ice cream machine, fill up the cups, and drive them down to the pit for all the guys to share.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it was something they look forward to.
I know he was making his own onion rings and stuff like that.
We had fried onion rings, which was a novelty. Surprisingly, how much money comes in the concession stand to help pay for the purse.
They really upped the purse, which was the first time the purse had gone up and seemed like quite a while, but it didn't just go up, it went up a lot, to the point where it was paying more than Stafford or Thompson was.
They appreciated the competitors. I think like you'd win a heat race and they'd come down and give you, I think it was like $50 to win a heat race or something. I mean, that was pretty cool.
they offered $100 if you won a heat, a qualifying race, they would pay you $100 cash, which is a very nice incentive.
Especially for a guy like me that I wasn't winning any features, so I was winning heat races. So
we felt that we needed to do that to hopefully attract more, more drivers, maybe pull some of the Stafford guys down or the Thompson guys down.
They were clearly in it to put on a good show. They cared about the place. I thought they looked at it as a long-term investment for them.
It was like, wow, it was a relief because, again, it could have gone the other way really easily, with somebody that you don't know.
It was by choice. The decision was made because, number one, the fees. I mean, they were pretty substantial. We understood with that substantiality, you get the goods. You get the Winston sponsorship, you get the whole 9 yards. But knowing that the vast majority of our competitors, I don't think cared about NASCAR, to be honest. They were, EB, local guys, just, hoping to have enough money to buy a new tire every week and, bang out the dents from the previous week and just go racing and have fun. So I didn't, the Teddy Christophers and the, Ricky Fullers of the world, when they came and ran, I'm sure it meant something to them because they were running 3 tracks a week and it was a big deal for them. But for the majority of the guys, we felt it just wasn't that important and we just didn't do it.
Yeah, we went from like a NASCAR sanction to being a Busch series. They got the Busch beer distributor to underwrite a lot of the program. The KORTEWEG'S did.
George was a great guy, and he wanted to make that the best facility in the East Coast, as far as I'm concerned.
One of my favorite stories is I had bathroom duty to go into a ladies' room, and usually we had a big wire with a hook on it and a plunger, and I couldn't get this toilet to work, so I put the wire down, and I pulled out a bath towel from Lawrence Memorial Hospital. And I still wonder today why it didn't go down all the way.
I don't know who they didn't like to do that, but who wants to go into that? It has to be acceptable for a woman to go in there and at least feel comfortable. We replaced all the toilets. We needed something that flushed better. We needed Turbo 2000 that would take a towel.
87 and earlier, you had to race the track as much as you had to race the competitors. So, I mean, making the car work around that track, at least in my memory, that was half the battle.
And you had 2 phases of the old track. You had the first phase that had the dirt around the outside, and then the second phase of the old track, they paved it up to the wall, and it was like that when I started. It was paved to the wall. But the trick was that the track was banked, and then the banking went away.
The old track, the groove was much higher.
The groove was way up high, like 2/3 of the way up.
Not right up against the wall, but probably 2/3 of the way up the racetrack on both ends of the racetrack.
That's why the middle was the best part, because the bottom was flat and the top was flat.
It was a one groove. You had to get to the bottom to pass racetrack for the most part.
If you were fast, you could go up high behind somebody, duck down low, and get a good run on them and make the pass.
The old surface, it had character, had that bump in turn 1.
It was almost like a speed bump on the bottom.
That bump going into the first turn.
Getting into 1, there's that little dip. And guys that knew how to use that bump could definitely take good advantage of it.
The only one who knew how to get over that bump was Bob Potter.
Potter was great at it.
And Bob Potter used to get down in that bump down in turn 1 and he set his car up for that bump. And he'd go right to the front. I used to love watching him.
I remember that in the late models, at least, everybody chained the left front because you'd hit the bump going into turn 1. And if you were down low and you hit the bump and you'd come up, like your spring would spin in the pocket.
Well, I think what bothered me was that on the old surface, Bob Potter was the master of the low groove. He had that famous bump in the one turn and the dip and all that. And he seemed to be one of the few that could really sail through there and keep his car without running into anyone. Finally, when I just started learning how to do that, then they took and repaved it,
probably around 35 truckloads of dirt brought in. As everybody remembers, the flat spot on top, which was dirt. We put 3-foot bevel on that from the railroad tie back down to the top groove.
I remember the pavement well from the first time I saw that. It just was like, oh my gosh, this looks really different. And then there was guardrails, which hadn't been there before.
We had put up the Armco barrier in front of the railroad ties. We left most of them there.
There were a lot of dark spots on the track.
Should have seen it back then. You couldn't see a thing.
And we tried to eliminate all the dark spots, and it came out very good.
I remember that the first time we did it at night, it was amazing.
Yeah.
It was night and day.
When they paved the pits, that's when they really helped things out.
I mean, that was probably as big of an improvement paving the pits as it was paving the track.
You were able to make the cars go faster because you weren't running through the dirt all the time.
George put up a new announcer's tower, too.
It was big. It was a nice, comfortable, relaxing atmosphere up there.
So the track it didn't seem as campy, so to speak. It was more cleaned up.
They kind of took the track from being like just a hole-in-the-wall backwoods racetrack and kind of brought it into the present day.
But then on the other hand, there were some things that were very similar, like you have the grandstands are pretty much the same thing. And there was still, what I like about the Speedbowl, there's a nice connection to the past through that track. The Speedbowl is not that much different. You still have the fence around the pits and all that, and the turn 3 and all, and there's a lot of good things about the sort of continuity of history. That's a really nice little racetrack there.
They finished paving it just before they opened.
Were you concerned with whether or not you could pull that off?
We had it planned to start the season with a new track, and we didn't know how the new tarred surface with no rubber on it was going to react.
It was smooth as silk when they did it.
I remember the timing being that the pavement should have went down and we should have waited a couple more weeks. So it was actually too early to race on it, but opening day was there. The biggest problem we had is that any gas leak and it just eats the tar away. So we had some divots that we had to go back in and fill, but we fought the curing process, and then it was the next week and you had to race in the next week. Right. So it should have been done sooner. I don't know if that was a delay on the paving people or we didn't plan that well, but it was hard to watch that sort of get ground up.
Was there a lot of complaining about the track, or?
Yeah. I mean, they were happy it was paved and it was smooth and all that, but then it was totally different setup, totally different racetrack now.
The issue was now getting the car to handle and then racing your competitors.
You walk out to the wall, down to the bottom, instead of just running around the outside before.
It dropped the groove right to the bottom, and it was tough for all of us to set the cars up. The racing was, you ran around the bottom now instead of the outside. I liked it the other way better.
I loved Waterford when it was in that prior configuration, and when I heard they were going to pave it, it was almost like, God, I hope they don't ruin it. And for a while, I remember going there and seeing the fast groove be right on the bottom, and it's like, oh, don't tell me.
Everybody was a bottom hugger, including myself, on a new surface, and the track was immediately, you went about 1.5 seconds faster than you did previous on the old surface.
When the asphalt was new, it was lightning fast on the bottom.
It definitely changed the way the tires worked,
And the first time we went down there, it was just tearing the tires up off the car on the right side.
Some guys just had to rethink their strategy.
You know, it was a learning experience, and eventually figured out how to get around there. But it was tough in the beginning. It was, some of the stuff didn't work. That worked for years.
The Sunday events, we would race these Enduros, which is basically a street car, bring it out, and they'd race for a trophy.
From one of the Enduro races, these guys wanted to race. We couldn't have an Enduro race every week, so we started a new division.
And we even debated what to call it. We didn't know what, we didn't really know what to call it. We were thinking of pure stock, and of course we're, looking at other racetracks to see what they call their third division, if you will, street stocks or whatever. So we settled on something a little more perky, maybe, by calling them strictly stocks.
We had a meeting and said, all right, this is what it's going to be, and this is what the inspection is going to be. And you can't use some Japanese tires, and you can't do this, and you can't do that.
It was strictly stock. It was, there was no changing bolts in the control arms, street tires, no spring changes, no, you didn't even have a full cage, just a center section, and you had to run the inner fender wells. Door skins, everything had to be there.
We ran with it, and little by little, each week we had more cars, and it became a nice division.
Yeah, we started with 4.
Yeah.
We started with 4 the first week.
Looking for their first ever green flag. Anticipating what could be their first race for history.
I think the first car that was out there was Brett Cash.
As he works up in turn number 1, the 23 of Hank Green exchanges a little tape from the turn. Got it, Castellano. He checked his Castellano tie.
4 cars showed up the first night. We all could have died. What do you do with 4 race cars? But it was kind of fun, and we were able to show the fans what they were going to be like.
And every week it seemed like every week there'd be a few more.
It was amazing to see that division evolve.
It was interesting. There was 40 cars, 45 cars. Guys were showing up with 6-cylinder Novas and everything that ran they'd put on the track, and you had to earn your way into the race. Those, in the early days, first couple of years was particularly crowded.
My good buddy Bruce Adams won the championship that year.
Get your head out a little bit in the sun. That's better.
Alan Wallstrom, yep. Back then he had that 69, it was an old 70 Monte Carlo. We ran the Kelly Supercharger tires, but he'd win all the time. His father raced modified, so he had an upper hand, He was a hard charger, and Kenny, we had some good battles.
He was awesome to watch. Like you said, starting deep every week, 15 laps, he got to the front and got the job done. He was a little rougher than I was, but, he won some races.
Dave was a smart guy. He knew how to set a car up. If he got that car right, he was good.
Bobby Bruce working down low. He's got the short way around the 1/3 mile oval. Mike Holdridge at the disadvantage. He's working the long route around the 1/3 mile oval. White flag already being displayed to the field. Out of turn number 4 for the final time. One of the drivers looking for win number 2. Final time out of turn number 4, Larry Barnett looking for his first feature victory in 1991 with the sponsor wanted Monte Carlo.
They were the first division that really utilized the pits on the other side, right?
That's right, because obviously with the late models and the mods in the main pit area, we had no room.
They pretty much had to have more pit area because there was no way they're going to get them in that small pit area that we were using.
And of course, then once they started to get relevant, the division. They started to complain, hey, when are you going to pay our pits and big rocks and everything else? It's like, well, we'll stop paying your purse money, then we'll save that money every week and pay for your pits, right?
You'd leave on a Saturday night and everybody would have twisted ankles because the rocks were huge in the pits.
They came to us and said, we're a real division now. We're putting people in the stands. So, back to purses, you need to pay us more. We're driving through the dirt. They're taking pride in their strictly stock. The rule book was strictly stock. And of course everybody bends the rules, but it was a great division.
And to their credit, they were right. The lights back there were really bad. The guys brought their own lights and stuff. It was not a good situation, but they kept at it, and they supported the division all those years, which was great.
The 1982 opener was my last race at Waterford for a long time, and Dickie Dew won that race, and he had his 31 Pinto, but if for some reason I think the guy's name, I want to say it was Dave Perkins, maybe. There was a guy who had a number 49 coupe, and I think he was somehow associated with Dickie Dew. Anyway, Dickie Dew's Pinto for that race had like this brown thing over the number, and it said number 49. Well, anyway, he beat Bob Potter to win that race. And that was an amazing show, too, and a real nail-biter because it came right down to the very end of the race, and Potter was the best of the best, and he's been for a long time. Potter was an exceptionally good, talented racer, and to see Dickie Dew beat somebody of the caliber of Bob Potter, that was an amazing show.
That blue 31, another iconic, Waterford Speedbowl car. If you saw that car parked at Thompson in one of those great mid-70s small block modified shows, you thought of Waterford, and you'd wander over there, hey, how'd you guys do last night? He was one of the guys, one of the Speedbowl stars.
Not many people knew my dad started off drag racing. That was our thing. He had a pickup truck with a motor hanging out of the hood, and then he went to a Camaro, 67 Camaro, I believe it was. And then someone wanted him to try racing at the Speedbowl in the Daredevils. Looked like a rainbow trout, spot painted with every different color you could imagine.
Always ran good. I think Dew worried more about winning races than he did about points. And that year, they made a real good run at the championship.
He won a championship without winning a feature that year.
He would be aggressive through the pack until he got in the top 5, and then he would be more conservative.
Through the years, his sons have been involved. His wife drives the same way.
For how many years I would go there occasionally, and Joyce, Dick's wife, would be working in the pit shack. He's a character. If you ever get a chance to talk to him, you wonder where Todd or Ricky get their sense of humor from. Certainly from Dickie.
He wanted to always quit on top, and that's what he did. He accomplished it. Well, I kind of expected that he was going to retire. My dad wasn't coming to the shop every day. We didn't want him in the garage. My brother and I, and we really pushed hard on the car. And I knew if we got him to that point to win a championship, most likely to retire.
I remember at the banquet when he got up and made his speech is when he told everybody that was it. He was going to retire.
Dickie, he retired in 88 after he won the championship.
And we talked about what he's going to do, and we talked to Bob Potter, and Bob Potter was going to drive the car.
He asked me to drive the car for 89, the same car, the chassis dynamic car. And, I was really flying with that car.
My dad told him, you win a championship, we'll buy you whatever car you want for the following year. So he won the championship in the CD car.
Modified champion of the Waterford Speedbowl. The driver is Mr. Bob Potter, the 6-time champion. Driving the car, owned by Ricky in Todd, Ceravolo, Groton, Connecticut. Gentlemen, the final step forward. Well, last year you did it with a chassis-built automobile. What is it going to be for 1990?
It's going to be Troy this year.
And then Bob wanted a new Troyer car.
So I knew a guy that had a Troyer car. He was getting out of racing. And we went up and looked at the car, and he bought that car.
And we found one that only had like a couple races on it, and we bought it, for Bob to drive.
I grew up watching Bob, watched him do some really cool stuff on the track.
thinking that, hopefully I can do that someday.
I always had a thing. I always watched Potter growing up. I mean, he would just kind of always be there, and you'd never really see him do anything too out of control or too flashy, but the next thing you know, with 5 laps to go, he's sitting there inside the top 5. And then they get a couple of restarts, and then he's sitting third. And then they get another restart, and, the next thing you know, he's in the lead, but you don't really remember how he got there.
Probably one of the smoothest drivers out there.
In our era, he was the modified representative. He had been there for a long time.
You think of all the handicap start features that guy ran. So if you saw him win 50 races, he started further back than 10th. So you saw Bob Potter pass 500 cars, at least, in your life. I mean, you think about that with certain guys that always came from the back, the number of quality passes you saw them make. And again, Potter's another guy, like Dick Dunn, that I never associate with crashing or any of that. Maybe later on as the SK division got more equal, where everybody had an equal car, I saw Bob involved in some stuff like that.
For some reason, that's the best I've ever felt. So I said, well, I'm going to the outside. And Mark Lajeunesse was in the front of me.
Quite an exciting night of stock car racing, and as it continues here in the open wheel division.
So I'm going by him right on the outside. I was coming out of second corner, and front 2 guys got crossed up.
Moves forward, we've got problems on the backstretch. We've got a car right out of the ballpark. We've got a car out of the ballpark on the backstretch, ladies and gentlemen. It appears to be car number 31 of Bob Potter.
Something happened in front of us, and somebody got crossed up in front of us, and then I hit the brakes hard to avoid it, and then I got hit in the back, and somehow Bob come along.
And I was wide open, and I was on it. When I was on it, I wasn't that far behind Mark.
However, I got turned around, and he went up over my wheels, and off he went.
It flipped me up more, and then it just went up. And the fence must have caught the car or something on the bottom of the car. And it's funny because when the car came down, it came down right on that fence. And I didn't even feel like it wasn't even a hard landing, Like it was soft. I felt like it.
It was almost like one of those, you don't think it really happened.
Oh, yeah, that was crazy. I always knew it was possible for that to happen, but never thought I'd see it,
He caught those cables just wrong.
I watched the fence folding up around his car, and I watched the entire fencing around the entire racetrack.
It just pulled all the way around the track. The wires were pulling.
So as I'm throwing the red, I feel a breeze. I'm like, what the hell is that?
It whipped back and forth all the way around the track. It was an amazing thing to see.
That's back when we didn't have a walkway either. You could walk wherever you wanted to on that road. So we'd have to walk right where he landed 5 minutes earlier.
But it landed on its feet, sitting in the pit road, looking at the racetrack.
It was funny seeing him sit up on the angle of my brook.
I remember it took a long time to get the car off it because the wreckers were trying to figure out how to get it off without, demolishing it.
And I remember walking down the backstretch after everybody had cleared out and just walking around and looking at, the fence, and that was just an amazing sight.
I remember everybody crowding in over there after it did happen.
For the people in the stands, you get that collective gasp. For somebody like myself that had been in a race car, my first thought is, I'm sure he's fine.
Well, it was wild, but it was like one of my easiest wrecks. As far as I didn't get hurt, I wasn't sore.
Luckily, you didn't get hurt, but the races were over for the night. That was it.
The show was suspended after that happened. There was no way we could run. The track just wasn't safe to run on.
Races were canceled for the night because it was unsafe for the way it was tore up.
The rest of the night got canceled, and that bummed me out more than anything. I'm like, come on, man, we can't go racing.
I got a phone call. I was working in Chicago at the time.
Oh, so you weren't there?
I wasn't even there. My brother called me. He says, "You ain't gonna believe this." He says, Bob went out of the track, and I'm like, "You kidding me?" So I, is he okay? It was the first thing I asked. He goes, oh yeah, he's fine. He got out of the car. And I said, well, the next thing he goes, what's the car look like? He goes, it's a mess.
There was a comical part about that the competitors are saying they had a rule that you had to leave the racetrack under your own power to return to the race. There was no doubt he left under his own power, so he got to rejoin the race the week after.
I was so mad because I was stupid. I did a mistake, and I made a mistake. Got on it too early, but when when that car feels good, when every tire is biting and they're all biting the same, and it feels like they got claws, they're digging into the track. You want to go, you just don't want to hold back. I didn't want to hold back, but I learned after that, Rick, not to do that no more.
What's more important at the bowl, setup or motor?
Setup. Don't get me wrong, you still got to have motor. You have to have enough motor. But if you're not going around the corner, you're not going nowhere.
Where's the number 19 come from?
I always liked Moose Hewitt. Living on a farm, that's why the nickname stuck with Farmer Phil. I had dune buggies and stuff and used to always run around out in the woods with that and dirt bikes, and ended up buying a late model.
I remember Phil as a rookie. He pitted right next to us.
When Phil Rondeau first came to Waterford, he couldn't drive nails. Believe me, couldn't drive nails. I had no clue. I mean, the first year we won the third race that I ever was in '83. I actually come off the fourth turn and hit the gas. Artie Moran was behind me, and the coil died. And I got in his way, and he just pushed me across the line. He didn't even know it. And I'll tell you, he evolved into a top flight competitor.
I mean, once Rondeau got it, once that whole deal clicked, I mean, everybody else is pretty much racing for second.
That guy in a late model was, him and Brian McCarthy. I mean, there was guys that were just, it was going to be fun to watch. Wherever you started him, just watch that guy. Phil, a lot of times was that guy.
He asked if I wanted to drive his car at the bowl. And I said, sure, why not?
Well, naturally I watched the races and I saw that he was a good driver and I wanted to get him in my car. And he was trying to run Stafford in different places, so he was spreading himself thin. So this was a perfect opportunity for both of us. And we built the first G-metric car that they had down there. And that thing was so fast that you couldn't help but win. I had a good driver and the car was fast, so it was a really good team.
It was an excellent car.
When Phil drove for me, he ran the Waterford leg, and then he had his own car at Stafford.
He was equally as good at Thompson and Stafford as he was at Waterford because he won championships all three places. We won a lot of stuff that year. It was one of them years that everything just worked.
Very, very smart, almost in the Eddie Flemke mode of, I know exactly what I'm doing here. He knew where he was all the time and does it with coolness, man,
We were extremely proud.
As owners of the track, it felt like he won for us. I'm sure they didn't think of that at all, but we were proud to say that's our guy.
I like Phil. He can turn a piece of crap into like something that wins races. I don't know how he does it.
He was hands-on, and he lived and breathed racing, you know, and he was a talented driver.
I think he was a great driver.
Whatever it takes to win is Phil.
Phil Rondeau, I saw win so many late model races at Waterford in that tri-track period. You know, when I think it was great for him because he got a lot of people got exposed to him that might have only seen his name in the racing papers.
What was your first SK wreck?
With Rich Silvestri in the 8.
That number 8, yeah, that was a chassis dynamics built car.
They actually called me and asked me if I'd drive it.
Oh, really?
Yep. And I said, sure, I'll give it a shot.
I thought he looked great when he ran SK cars and modifieds. I was really surprised. I'd seen him as being a career late model guy for so long, and I didn't know if he had any desire to move up. And then when he finally did, I thought he looked like $1 million. And you thought, man, this is going to be fun to watch him develop.
He's a great, great racer, but I think our infatuation with modifieds makes anything else we don't want to look at as real. You know, everything else is second to modifieds. So I think that hurts Rondeau. But I'm telling you, he's a very, very, very smart racer on the racetrack.
When Phil in '88 moved on, the KORTEWEG'S bought it, and the price there, the purse went up a lot. So he got his own car, and he won a lot of races. He made some money. And then I said, well, I might as well drive this car. I didn't even put a body on it. And I went out and learned and banged around and did what I could, just try to learn.
The first year he come down there after I got out of the car, he was a disaster. I mean, he couldn't do nothing. I mean, it was bad. And I'm sure he would even say he was bad. But I remember him coming up to me and saying it at the next year. He says, you know, I figured out how to drive. His father used to tape every week when I was driving the car, the heat races, everything. He'd watch every race, he said. I figured out how to drive by watching the tapes of you.
And then in '89, I built a new car, and that's when we started to run pretty good. So it took a year to get acclimated.
He improved 1,000% from what he was the year before.
So you actually contributed to Jay Stuart becoming a better driver?
Don't say that too loud. I gotta admit, the guy is smart when it comes to setup. I mean, if you go out there with the car and the car's doing something, and you come in, and he'll tell you what the car was doing, watching it. And there ain't that many guys out there that can sit there and go, all right, the car's loose on doing this because it's loose.
Good setup guy, good chassis guy.
Very excellent mechanic.
Extremely intelligent. Extremely intelligent.
He's a student of the sport. And this is the thing that always confused me about Jay Stewart. When he finally got into the car and drove himself, he was really good. And he won a lot of races. And I always wondered, why didn't he just drive for himself from day one? He would have won all those races himself.
Was it a shock that he was a good driver?
To me it was, yeah, like, wow, yeah. You know, why wasn't he driving all along? You know,
it's hard to imagine owners getting into behind the wheel. It is. And he did it really well.
Because there are so many car owners that the reason why they're car owners is because they know that they wouldn't be good drivers, or they don't even want to drive. But they enjoy the sport and they want to own a car. And you look at somebody like Jay and you assumed that was the case. But then all of a sudden one day he puts a helmet on. And it's like, wow, this boy can drive too.
I think it was evident really early on that he was there to compete with, the echelon of that division.
That was a rivalry and a half, especially since I drove for him.
His car was hooked all the time, and we were hooked. And we didn't really bang around, but we ran close, tight.
We'd rub, maybe bang a little bit. But I mean, never really, taking each other out or, it was racing.
The cars were set up similar. They were really, really had a lot of bite. So we could bang and bump a little bit, and it really didn't affect very much. It was a lot of fun, really.
I am not the guy that put a helmet on and people said, wow, did you see that guy go? That never happened. My first year was 79, and I don't I didn't win a race until I ran my modified in '83, and then I won in '83, I won in '84, and then I won a race in '86, the World Series. I went up there and backed into a win, but I was about a 5th place car, and one by one they dropped out and missed a gear on the restart and just did all this stuff, and I ended up leading the last lap. Yeah, it was great. But I really wasn't that good. And at that point, I still didn't, I hadn't won any street stock late model races. In '89, I kind of turned the corner.
He had a fast car. I mean, he knew he had the car right out to the rules.
Tommy Fox, I remember, went for a while there where he was really tough to beat.
I put Tommy sort of in that same group. Tommy was a strong runner.
When I was racing, if you bumped me or whatever and got me out of shape or spun me out, all right, I started in the back. I didn't care. There was only one thing that I wanted, and that was winning. I didn't care about going up and roughing you up and, I'm going to spin you out. That's not what I'm here for. I'm here to win.
A lot of the limelight went to Rondeau and Stuart with their epic battles.
I grew up watching Phil Rondeau and Stuart McCarthy and Fox and all those guys.
Who would you say was your biggest rival during your racing career?
Probably Jay.
Rondeau, simple, didn't like Jay. Jay, simple, didn't like Rondeau. Tom, didn't like Jay. Jay didn't like anybody.
If you're coming to the front and Jay's in the lead, are you more amped up to beat him than you would anybody else?
For sure.
They were battling week after week.
Once again, out of turn number 4, Jay Stewart with an advantage over Tommy Fox. Fox right on Stewart's back bumper down into turn number 1. Fox looks down low. Side by side, they're loose. Phil Rondeau takes over down the backstretch in turn number 3. Tommy Fox and Jay Stewart get loose down the backstretch.
The first year they ran it at Flemington, I went down and I ran it every year right through '95. Every year we went down there, I set fast time, would win my qualifying race. I would get to the lead, and I didn't win any of those. And the one that I won in '93, I never actually led a lap. I finished second, and the winner got DQ'd.
The late model division, the guys were really close back then. The competition was fantastic.
They tried to crowd me in the middle. It's like the Malachi Crunch they were trying to pull on me. I just went in, and Tommy hit me, I hit Jay.
Well, it was a big deal
for me when Mike Dagnall came back, because I was a Mike Dagnall fan as a kid. You know, it was a big deal for me to actually be able to call a race that Mike Dagnall won.
Out of turn number 4, win number 2 in 1991, fourth Big Mike Dagnall.
I was a big fan of CJ Fry.
I mean, we all got better, and I think that's why we were so competitive.
That late model division in that time period, they were just as enthralling as the modifieds were.
If you went out there to watch the late models race and you bought a ticket, you got your money's worth.
We tried different things to get more racers in, to get more people in the grandstand.
And it started with family fun nights.
Crash Moreau. The main maniac takes aim. He pulls the trigger. And he fires as he goes through the wall of steel.
That was us bringing what we thought was going to be new business.
Clowns, the kids. Bring the kids out onto the racetrack and they could see the race cars and you could see the sparkle in their eye. But that was future fans. And that's what they needed to. And it just brings them along.
And then later on, we started doing some of the Sunday races, the Enduros. Yep. So I kind of took a race director role on those days.
And it was all intended to keep the cost down. Give the guys a chance to go racing, come out, have some fun.
We brought in hundreds of cars.
4-cylinder Enduro cars here today, and the regular 8 cylinders. Here's a number 2.
It was families, and you had big pockets of fans of this guy and that guy, and everybody had T-shirts, and there was a party afterward. There was cars, 35, 40 cars, and they started everybody.
And the one I can remember is Mark Lewis.
Ladies and gentlemen, the winner of the 50-lapper from New Britain, Connecticut, driving car number 38, New England, is Mark Lewis.
It was a cheap show to run, a cheap ticket.
Was a chance for somebody to race that didn't have to go out and buy a late model or modified.
Etheridge on the throttle. RPM rise, and they go charging down the front straightaway.
It was more like an Enduro when you first started. Then they started throwing yellows and having rolling restarts and started to become more like racing.
But the pure stocks were basically the Enduro cars, spiffed up a little bit. Four bangers, they just came along as a natural filler for another division.
Alfa Romeo, they're outlawed now. I mean, that car was fast. Subi could get the job done behind the wheel, but that was a fast car.
As Stacy Owak looks to pick up the win in the 15-lap ladies race.
I remember trying to do a couple of concerts, which I don't remember that being very successful. I think we had one rather big country name come in. I don't remember who it was, but we started to do flea market. And again, that started off very slowly. We had them lined up all around the track, and much of the pits were covered. Nothing that resembled Don Honig's deal up at Thompson. I know his is humongous. I remember they were lined up 2 in the morning to get in and just to get the prime spots and whatever.
One favorite moment, we brought in like 7 big wheels. So we had kids come down. So we put a cone on the start-finish line and one maybe halfway between turn 1 and the finish line, and wave the flag and the kids. So we say, 1 lap around the cones and there'll be a winner. And one kid goes by the cone and he's just pedaling into turn 1. So he thought he had to go all the way around the track. And we had a track worker, Leon, and he was just a huge guy. So he goes running after the guy down the front stretch. You can't make up stuff, but we try to do little things like that, and some of it really worked well.
Yeah, speaking of extra stuff, something that just came to mind was when we did fireworks.
Oh, right.
Atlas would come in and do fireworks, and we all used to watch it from the stands, and then, of course, being the owners, we were able to kind of go wherever we wanted to watch them. A couple things I remember. One is just the tremendous power to launch these things into the air. It seemed like no big deal to the people maybe, but for us it was like, holy mackerel, this thing is doing this. And secondly, I remember Joe Golis, just in his commentary, ooh, ah.
Oh, that's pretty. Oh, there we go. Up, 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 up. Ah.
I talked to the boss of the operation, and he says, how long do you want this to last? And I says, shoot them off. And it was like 12 minutes of bang, bang, bang. The crowd went wild.
Because the more time that people watched the fireworks, the less people went to the concession stands. So we wanted to do it and just get it over with, So.
If I didn't get my concession time, they heard about it.
and that's literal. That's literal. We had, gone were the telephones. Now we had the headsets. And, we were ready to race. The guys were ready to race. The cars are lined up. You can hear them in the pits. And he'd be over the head, said, I need 10 more minutes. We were accused of having long intermissions, no doubt. But again, as we said earlier, that's what people don't realize. That's right. That's right.
We're laughing so bad at the video. Oh, I know it.
Oh, too high, drop it, miss it! Go, go!
Let's go, Joe. Let's go.
I hope you got that, Diane.
We tried a bunch of other stuff, and really the best by far was just the racing. Regular Saturday night, nothing special, regular feature races, regular purses, beautiful weather. It was awesome.
They ran the show back then. There was always a cop, a DMV cop at the races every Saturday night, always, in the infield.
Every track had a motor vehicle department car in the infield or in the pits.
He would drive out on the track with his state car.
You'd see that guy roaring over there.
get out, and he'd shimmy around his belt. And sometimes I believe he even stopped us from pulling cars away because he had to record the accident.
And they would always inspect the cars and all. They might ask me to get something. I want you to get a picture of the driver's seat here from this crash, and things like that if somebody was injured.
They were in control. They had the final say on everything.
Back then you had to get a weekly permit.
They had the permit. If they said you weren't racing, you weren't racing.
Incident where a driver got a little upset and they would go after each other. He became the policeman in that scenario, and then it'd say reckless endangerment or something like that.
There'd be a wreck, a couple cars would be stacked up. Everything had to stop, and they had to measure everything, just like it was a crash on I-91. I mean, it was almost bizarre.
Literally like it was an accident scene on the highway. That's how he treated it, and he would tell us what we could or couldn't do.
It always seemed to me that they cluttered things up and kind of got in the way by trying to apply, everyday motor vehicle accident science to every racing crash that happened.
The DMV rules, as far as racetracks go, as far as I know, remain the same, just that there was no inspector that needed to be there.
That was probably a good call, frankly. Yeah, you don't really need them there. I mean, the track can run their own show.
It was a layer of bureaucracy that didn't necessarily have to be there.
In every town, you look in every town in the United States, when a racetrack goes for a permit, the battles they have to go through to get a permit. They don't like the dirt, they don't like the noise, they don't like the traffic, they don't like a lot of things until it comes time to pay the taxes. When they pay the taxes, oh, they're not so bad now, they're paying taxes.
There was always permit problems. I think there was always question of taxes. Could they have been better partners, the town? Probably. I think it was strained at best and maybe quite adversarial at times.
They looked at us as being another business, and the people that lived around the track didn't want us there.
As many of you know, especially those of you who live in the local area, we're getting more and more, call it flack if you will, call it just plain resentment from the local neighbors who unfortunately moved into the area where a racetrack was long after the Speedbowl was already in existence. And now we're deciding to try and do something about that.
They started an organization here. They wanted to try to close the Speedbowl up.
Just look around New England, how many tracks we've lost. There's a lot of them going out of existence because of groups like that have been strong enough, have enough political clout to make it happen and close them up.
It was a battle of a group of residents that lived on Butlertown Road back there, and they just wanted the place basically shut down.
They started that association. They wanted me to join. I said, I'm part of it. I'm not going to join. I love the race. And well, don't the noise bother you? I said, no, because I'm over there.
The biggest problem was those houses came after the Speedbowl.
You know, everybody had the same attitude. If they knew the racetrack was there, why in the hell did you buy a house?
And a lot of people that were complaining about it really bought their property knowing that the track was already there.
You bought your land cheaper because it was near the Speedbowl, and now say, well, that's hurting the value of my property. Well, the value wasn't there to begin with, but you want your property worth more. And that's what they were fighting.
When I moved out here, there was only 5 houses on this whole road.
Once people moved out there, when they started cutting down the bushes and the trees and stuff,
they cut a lot of the trees down, they opened it up.
Then they started complaining about the noise. Well, the bushes and the trees is what absorbs a lot of the noise.
And we all told them, when you cut them all down, it made it worse.
I took pictures of trees and barriers, and they cut them down.
Try and do our part to make peace with our neighbors, to keep good ties with the town of Waterford. One reason is moving up to 5 o'clock to hopefully end at an earlier hour. We're also going to institute a muffler rule this year that many of you know about already.
When they come up and said that they were going to put mufflers on them and try to quiet them down a little bit.
We all bought mufflers, and I thought the mufflers weren't a bad thing.
Actually, I kind of like it with the mufflers. It's not, you know, you don't get that raspy, you don't go home at night with a headache.
It takes the sharpness out of it.
I remember sitting down there, even watching, coming home, and I couldn't hear good sometimes, you know, like going to a concert.
I won the first muffler race, that was 1991.
Going out to Dennis and
And we're just continuing to take steps to improve our program so that the local town people will not only tolerate us, but also respect us and work with us to better the town of Waterford.
It's really important, especially now, to be a good neighbor as a racetrack. You can't get around it. I mean, if you're going to be a bad neighbor, you're going to be history sooner than you'd like. But you may be history anyway, but you might as well try to go out being as good of a neighbor as you can be.
I had my own car with a guy named Ray Williams helped me out. And we went over there and we raced for a season. And we did not bad. We did pretty good. And one night I was going to win my first race. I took the white flag, come down the backstretch, and Greg Moran took me out on the backstretch. In 1992, I got a phone call from Dave Irish with the 11X and started racing for him, and we hit it off.
side by side down the back stretch into turn number 3. Joey Coates running in the third spot. Glenn Boss running fourth. They slip slide out of turn number 4 as a win goes to Glenn Boss of Charleston, Rhode Island. Reed Jr. and Glenn Boss out of turn number 4 as Eddie Reed Jr. picks up his 5th win of the season.
Halfway through the season, the guys took up a collection so they could get me torn down to see why I won so much. So they ended up tearing me down. During the tear down, to look at the motor, I showed there was a discrepancy in the frame rail. I showed the tech guys the discrepancy, asked them if there was going to be an issue. They told me that night, no. So I never changed it.
But me and Eddie basically, you know, we were the 2 top runners that year.
It was actually a great season. I won a lot of races that year. I led the points for all the way into the last race.
It was a crazy thing, you know. You got 100 points to win, 95 to second. Well, I was 95 points behind Eddie, and he had to basically get nothing. for me to win the championship, and chances of that were slim.
I could have just taken the green and parked it, but there was a win total that Alan Wallstrom had, and I wanted that record. So went out, won the race.
As less than a half a circle remaining as the field works away down the back stretch into turn number 3, continues to be Eddie Reed, Ian Glenn Boss, Ken Cassidy right there for third. Checker flag out for the final time for the Limited Sportsman in the 1992 point race.
The 1992 Limited Sportsman champion here at the Speedway, as Eddie Reed Jr. does it in convincing fashion as he picks up his 6th win of the year.
He ended up winning the race. I finished second. We go to Tech.
The Tech guy went right to that spot where I showed him earlier and said it wasn't any good. So they ended up DQing me.
He got DQ'd, got no points. I got the 100 and I beat him by 5. We won the championship Saturday night at Waterford. And then we'd go through Tech Saturday night at Waterford, and if the car wasn't that bad, we'd get it ready for Thompson and go to Thompson on Sunday. And then we won the championship at Thompson, so we won 2 in 1 year. You know, if it wasn't for Dave Irish, I wouldn't have what I have. You had 40 cars in the pit, you ran a concert, and then if you didn't qualify, you went home.
Louis Belisle looking to become yet another repeat winner.
Out of turn number 4 for the final time as the win goes to Louis Belisle.
20 laps the distance, second feature event of the evening. Green flag is out. They shift him up through the gears and the race is on.
I used to work with Kim Jarrow at that time. Kim was doing programs and things, and she was daughter of Moose Hewitt.
Kim Garrow started that with the old timers racing and stuff like that. And she was a very instrumental part of all that.
Ladies and gentlemen, the legends of the Waterford Speedbowl. Uncountable numbers of feature victories belonging to these drivers. A lot of track championships. Some of these drivers haven't raced in a lot of years. For others, it's only been a few short years.
That they would tape over the driver's door, so they'd bring those guys from back in time, they'd bring their numbers back.
My dad did that too, that Heroes race.
Oh, did he really?
Yeah.
Charlie Webster retired back in 1970. Ed Moody stopped racing back in 1967.
White flag out, final time around the 1/3 mile oval. Your leader closing in on Fred Fuzzy Bear. Out of turn number 4, the win going out to Ed Moody.
When's the last time you raced? Do you remember?
1967 we ran here at the Speedbowl with every one of these guys.
You could tell that they just wanted the glory days back, and they wanted them back right then.
No, they actually raced. They actually raced.
Whoa, somebody's on the binders, folks. They got a car sideways. He hangs on, though. Let me tell you, they just don't forget how to get the job accomplished.
Checker flag out this time by out of turn number 4, picking up the win. From Diana, Connecticut, and it's Rick Taylor driving car number 47.
Oh, those were fun. I wish they'd do them again. I might actually qualify for one of those pretty soon. No, they were good. It was good. Jerry Dostie took my car a couple times, my Chevelle, and first 2 times I think we had some mechanical problems, and I think the last time he drove, he ended up winning, which was really cool because he was flying up from Florida to do it.
Jerry Dostie looking to take over control from Artie Moran Sr. Jerry Dostie trying to make that airplane trip all worthwhile. And, you know, Jerry Dawson, you came all the way from Florida. I'm sure the trip is well worthwhile right about now.
Yeah, it feels really good. Feels good to get back in a race car, and I really enjoyed it. And I just hope that comes back and does it again next year.
It was kind of a big deal for us because we had been there for so long as fans, and you know, whether it was such a big deal for the fans, hard to tell. Yeah. I know we were thrilled. Yeah, we were thrilled. You know, Dick Casa, I mean, whoever came back, I don't remember all the names, but you know, whoever came back and did it. And thanks for the guys who lent their cars out as well, you know, to make that happen.
You know, anybody that does that, it's a risk to put your car out there with some guy that you don't know, especially a guy who hasn't driven, you know, for such a long time.
I remember my dad let Jerry Lilliquist drive the car, and I came home in a basket, you know.
I used to like watching the guys like get after it because I used to think to myself, man, if the people that lent these cars out to these guys knew that they were going to be banging fenders like that, I wonder if they would do it again.
Once a racer, always a racer. So those guys were pretty psyched.
That's what sparked old Johnny Gambino coming back. You know, he got the itch again, so that was kind of cool.
That's how we got introduced to Johnny Cambino. My racing hero back then was Chuck Zintarski. Chuck had a shop in West Haven, which is where I was from. As a kid, I used to go down his shop and learn from his guys working on their cars, on their late models and stuff. And when the very first, they called it the Legends race back then, Heroes of the Bull race came out, Chuck had come over and he asked us to have Johnny drive the car in the race because Johnny was his idol when he grew up. We were a little, you know, against it in the beginning, and we weren't sure if we wanted to do it. Chuck gave us his word that, you know, Johnny was a heck of a driver, and he took responsibility of the car. Chuck did. You know, if anything were to happen to the car, he was going to be responsible for it. You don't really think that, you know, the guy could still drive, but I mean, he was just a hell of a driver. I mean, he ended up winning the event.
Checkered flag is waving this time, huh? And it looks as though Johnny Cambino is going to beat him to the stripe.
You know, I drove 31 years. I ought to know a little something, no?
What racetracks did you drive at besides here?
West Haven, Plainville, Bridgeport, Thompson, Stafford. Where else you want to go?
You know what, Dave?
And the funny part was, Johnny was a very confident and kind of cocky guy. He was good, and he let you know that he was good. And he had something to say about just about everybody in the field, except for Dick Watson. You know, this guy looked like an old man. This guy was this guy was that. But Dick Watson was a great driver.
Checker flag coming out this time around as Dick Watson picks up the win.
Joe Macknick ran a soccer camp all over the country, and so he would miss a race here and there. So what happened was he was doing his camp somewhere, and he came in for the race. He went out for the heat race. He missed practice. First lap of the heat race, he had a really bad wreck and destroyed the car.
Green flag is out. Danny Green down on the inside. Ted Chafee on the outside. Pat Dinellen runs third. Problems. Joe Macknick into the wall hard with Gary Johnson in that 21G car. Both cars nose first into the Omco barrier.
So he comes in. The car came in on the wrecker. I mean, it was destroyed. And he says, well, I'm done. Happy birthday. It's your car now. And he gave the car to me. I was a 16-year-old kid and dying to drive. And so I'm thinking to myself, well, here's my chance. I'm going to get to drive this car. No sooner that Joe says I could have the car, my father turns around and looks at Johnny and says, all right, Eddie's going to fix the car. You want to race it next week? And Johnny says, yeah, sure. So so Johnny ended up in the car, and me and my buddy Steve ended up fixing it. And Johnny was our driver from there on out.
Everybody called him King Cambo, Johnny Cambino. I mean, he was one of Harvey Tattersall's stars in that era when United was really happening.
He was kind of a neat old guy. You know, you always talk about West Haven and stuff like that.
As an old timer, seeing someone like that, of that caliber, racing at the Speedbowl and the street stock was fabulous. It was great for the track.
Oh, Johnny Gambino, yes sir. He was a tough one. He didn't give you no slack. He raced you hard. For an old guy, let me tell you, he got the job done.
Kind of like a joke in the pit area. Oh, the old man's coming back and he's 60-something years old.
you know, and then all of a sudden the old man started whooping everybody's ass, and it wasn't so funny no more.
Back then, I didn't like it. I mean, he was beating us, you know. The old fart was kicking everybody's butt, you know. We all thought he was cheating and this and that, and I didn't like it back then.
He had good stuff, too. You know, the Julio stuff was real good. Right. You know, Julio's old man, they built some serious equipment.
He was an older guy, and you know, he was fast every week. You know, he was the one to watch out for. Dad battled with him.
Did it create situation with competitors? Because
yes, very much so. Very much so. And you know, a lot of times I was stuck playing referee or trying to play peacemaker, and sometimes he would get me fired up.
Who said Johnny's right? Who was that? 57 saying I took him in the wall. What done taking for? Who the hell I care is the back of it? You don't look him back. I'm watching the guy in front of me. He wants me to look at him in the back. He said, what do you got a mirror for? I don't use those goddamn mirrors. Who the hell's in back? I don't know what the fuck is.
Johnny is a, you know, old school Italian, and, you know, of course, Eddie's father is too. You know, sometimes it's hard to understand them, especially when they're mad.
I told him the one spun out on the third turn. He said, no, I can't do nothing, Johnny. Good job.
9 out of 10 of them came around once they got to know Johnny and got to know the way he was and what a great person he was. And that he was just funny, you know, and it was just amazing. So even the guys that hated on him in the beginning, by the end of his racing career, were fans of his as well as competitors.
He was a character, man. He was a lot of fun to hang with. He always had a story. He always made you laugh. He was always goofing around, joking.
There were so many cars there over the fence. I got sideways banged. He never went off. Just always.
Yeah, he kept it. He was funny in the pits, but when he got on the racetrack, he was tough. He raced you hard.
You know, we all liked seeing him back.
Johnny's a great guy. Johnny was a lot of fun.
Well, boy, he was having a ball.
You would never know, you know, that he was an older guy. I mean, people in the stands that didn't get to actually physically see him would never know because he was that good. And he took chances just like a young guy. I mean, he's, you know, he was the real deal. He drove for us for 4 years. He ran Waterford and Thompson on a weekly basis, and he won at both tracks.
It was neat, though, and I've always been kind of the opinion that if he wants to do it, or, you know, let him do it, you know, as long as the guy's physically capable of doing it.
He was actually the points leader at Thompson, and he had a really bad wreck off of turn 2, where he hit the wall, and then another couple cars hit him, and the car got wrecked real bad, and he actually got injured. And then that was it for him. He was done after that. But he still was around. He was still at the shop. He still came to all my races, and he was a great support for me.
You know, he didn't see it as anything, you know, insulting or whatever to be driving a street stock. You know, he'd been a big modified guy and a jalopy guy. He just wanted to do it to have fun, and I thought it was cool. But like I said, the only thing that bothers you a little bit is, man, don't walk by that guy without realizing who that is. You ought to tip your hat to that guy. That's Johnny Cambino.
Sometime in the 60s, my grandfather bought his first car. He personally never drove, always had drivers. Started between Plainville, Riverside Park.
And I mean, that was a car that Ronnie Burns, to me, is one of the unsung car owners of the last 50 years, really. I mean, his stuff won everywhere.
The amount of drivers he had is, we still to this day couldn't put a number on it. And they used to go to Riverside Park without a driver and wait till somebody blew up, and that would be their driver for the night. So, I mean, he's got a lot of years in owning race cars, and all the way through the 60s, 70s, until Plainville closed, that was really his home track. And that's when 54 came down to Waterford.
remember him coming down with Ronnie Burns' car, North End Auto Parts car.
Freddie Christopher out front looking for his third win of the year with an off-end Autobots entry.
I always wondered when he became a Waterford regular, how that was going to go over.
He's the guy that was racing when I was a kid that I used to cheer for.
I've always been a Teddy fan. You know, a lot of people, either you love him or you hate him.
When he first started coming up, really didn't like him.
Between being an outsider, not caring how popular he is, not necessarily giving a damn about the local guy's reputation, you know, you really wondered how that was going to go over.
For the third time in 1991, Teddy Christopher visiting Victory Lane.
All the haters have to admit that you cannot deny that the man can drive.
You can't deny his ability to get around anywhere and anything, but he can really get around the bowl.
He figured out the track pretty quickly. I mean, I know they were really a super good combination together.
Teddy had a lot of success down Waterford. They won the championship, I think it was in '92.
You know, he can definitely get the job done. He likes to use the front bumper like the old man would, you know, buff you out of the way a little bit.
As a little kid, the first thing we'd do Sunday morning when we woke up is run out and look at the car. And it kind of told the story of what happened that night. If there was fluids on the flatbed, you mean Teddy blew up. If the car was destroyed, Teddy wrecked. But if there was nothing, usually meant he won.
I believe Teddy Christopher is the best modified driver of our time. I also believe that if I was a multimillionaire, I would not put him in my car. Probably because on a bad day, he would tell me to go screw myself. And that's just the personality that he has.
Teddy wrecked on a Saturday night. It was the primary car. They had two cars. And they couldn't get that car fixed for the following week. And they told him, you're going to have to drive the backup car. Ted didn't want to drive the backup car. So they ended up putting Phil in it.
They were kind of ready to make a change and called me up and asked me if I'd drive it.
We'd like to announce the rehiring of Mr. Bill Long to resume his duties as race director at the Speedbowl in 1991.
Well, it changed obviously for me. It went from sort of just the general overseer of the racing activities to being on the flag stand, so I had kind of both responsibilities. When I made the decision to get back, to do the flagging while still being the GM, it was a tough decision because I didn't want to, favoritism or this, that, and the other thing. But you know what? I mean, we had good race directors over the years. They changed, but we still had good. I was confident of their ability, and that was sort of the last resort. If the race director couldn't solve the problem, then obviously I would get involved.
Kind of wanted it, because everybody has in their mind that they could run it better than anybody else. Until you actually do it, then you find out it's really an almost impossible job. Because, you know, you think, well, and all everybody even talked about was rough riding. You know, so you got to try to pick out, you see a wreck, okay, who caused it, who are you going to put to the back, da-da-da-da-da. And no matter where you stand or what, you get a different angle, and it's tough, you know, not being in the car and know exactly what's going on. So after a while, after like a couple of years of that, everybody's mad at you. You know,
Coming into the track and parking in the parking lot there and getting out and thinking, I can't barely even hear the cars.
I don't know if you ever noticed, you can't hear the cars from the parking lot. It's hard to hear the race cars from the Speedbowl parking lot. But if you go to my son's house up in Waterford Village, it sounds like they're in his backyard.
If you come here when they're racing, the noise is worse here than if you're over there. It echoes through them woods somehow.
I understand that they had problems with the town. They were trying to fit in, make sure that people didn't get mad at them.
I mean, the racing people, they couldn't say too much about it because the people in the neighborhood was fighting the noise. And, you know, the noise was there.
So the noise ordinance came up in the early 90s, and I was working a job on Long Island. They had tried to fight it themselves, and then finally one of the partners, John Holstein, said, I need somebody to come in and take more of a lobbyist view of this thing.
When Terry Eames first came into the track as a consultant, one of his big issues was the noise.
You know, I went over there on a Saturday with these green printed leaflets to hand out that said, your sport is being threatened, the future of the racetrack is being threatened. I was going to pass them out that night at the track. Well, it rained out. But I was there early enough that I met people lined up to get in because they never opened, but all the competitors were there.
And we definitely asked them to come, but I admittedly was surprised. The support was just really overwhelming.
They had to move this RTM meeting from a small little meeting room where it normally was to the largest meeting room. We filled that in its entirety with race supporters, race teams, and there were people outside the building looking in the windows.
I'm glad the weather was good because people were outside. I mean, there was just a ton of people there.
There was a lot of people. There was a number of residents, some of which lived miles and miles away but could faintly hear it. There was a group from Butlertown Road that was a strong group and had the ear of the elected officials. But then there was a lot of racers from the Speedbowl there.
We packed the place.
Just about everybody that raced there went to them.
Do you think the town was surprised at how many people were?
I absolutely do.
The town was blown out of the water.
I don't think they realized how big racing was, you know, with the Speedbowl.
It did open their eyes that, wow, there's actually a lot of people that support it and go to the track.
Certain people were there when I was glad they were there. I'm glad they didn't get up to speak, but I'm glad they were there. You know, I won't mention any names.
I talked like twice because I felt I should talk because I'm a resident of the town. A lot of other people, you know, are from Clinton, Deep River, Norwich, Taffel, you know, and they're getting up and talking about the Speedbowl and against the people that actually live there. And then they needed a couple people to talk from the town.
There was a subcommittee, I think it was the Public Safety Subcommittee, and the chairman was decidedly anti-racetrack, but a fair guy, Mike Canamella, a local teacher of some renown, and you know, he ran a good committee. His prejudice against the track showed a little bit, but there were two other members of that committee, and I wish I could remember their names because they really saved the racetrack. Because they went out they took a couple of nights at least and went door to door on Wayhill Road and Butlertown Road and interviewed the abutting neighbors. And they came back and said it was roughly 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. A third of the people it didn't matter one way or the other whether the track was there. Another third of the people hated it and would do anything to get it to close down the next day. And then there was a third that were racing enthusiasts and love having it in their backyard. They either attended or they liked the noise or, you know, had been there or their fathers had been there. So that report helped.
And they really didn't know anything about noise. Somebody said that the state level was 54 or 55, I forget what it was. So they said, we'll just make it 10 better. And acoustics doesn't work that way. You know, if you drop something 6 dB, it's half the noise. It's not a linear function. So 10 dB was just ridiculous.
That's what we ended up doing, was getting the neighbors to say, what we want is something that echoes the state noise ordinance.
We had me and a couple of other competitors down there doing muffler testing at one point.
We did some testing. We proved that if we just enforced the muffler law, the muffler rule that was in the rule book right then, the cars met that standard. So what we said was, okay, we'll support this. We'll help you pass a noise ordinance that matches the state. Well, the state's noise ordinance exempts all motor vehicles.
It's been a battle every year. If they ever lose the permit, I don't ever foresee it running again. They'll never pass all the codes and get by all the loopholes to get a track going again.
When I did hear that about Waterford, it was like, man, you could just hear that tick, 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 you know, this is coming to an end pretty quick. And I mean, here we're talking a lot of years later that it's still there, and thank God it is.
Man, how many times are you gonna pump it?
Ah, you're out of here.
Hey, who do we thank? Who are our sponsors?
Huh?
Who are our sponsors, and who do we thank?
Ace Security.
Yep.
Bob Gada.
Yep.
Senior, Junior. Michael Gada.
Yep.
Dennis Gada. And all the rest of the Gadas.
Gentlemen, we found Bob Gada. We're here right on the track surface. If you got a good close-up. Bob, what do you think about tonight's activities? Very exciting. And how did the boys do? 4th, 7th, and 9th. That's great. You must feel very proud of them.
Out of the turn, it's Gada. Across the line, it's Gada. Bobby Gada taking the win.
You know, it's kind of one of those things where when you're the father, it's a whole different. You know, I can watch other people race and get involved with other people that I've had. I mean, we've had plenty of people here that I've built cars for and raced with and stuff. But when it's your own kid, the whole deal is intense. And when you get people out there screaming and hollering at one or another, you know, for something they did on the racetrack.
If something happens out of the, one of the Gada clan again, you know. But that was the attitude.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem was back then when we had them all racing. You know, you got 4 kids out in the same race, and people get tangled up with one of them, and they blame all of them. You know what I mean? You can't imagine how it is to have your son out there and people calling them nasty names, and you know, and get involved. And a lot of times it was their fault, you know, and sometimes it wasn't. But I would say most of the time it wasn't. I have to say that.
I think brothers in racing make you a better driver because outside of all the other competitors, you want to make sure that you could outperform your sibling. So it brings out the best in you.
David was a really good driver. They had their own stuff, and he was very clean and tried to stay out of trouble because if you didn't have a lot, you couldn't wreck the car.
Back then, you could have a decent car and a decent motor, which is what we had. You know, good stuff.
Really cool to me is twice my boys have finished 1 and 2 in the track champion. Right? Twice that happened.
Mike and Dennis and David all running at the same time, all 3 of them. That was really kind of cool as well.
Ends up in victory lane with Mike Christopher doing the series tonight.
They even tried the 4-barrel carburetor on the SKs.
But it was an SK motor. Still, all those rules stayed the same. Just you could run whatever you wanted for an intake and carburetor. No rules at all.
I didn't mind it, but it really became more costly. When you had a 4-barrel motor, you had more power than you needed. It was cheap to build an engine, and you had all kinds of horsepower. $1,800, you could build a good motor and be competitive with the 4-barrel. And with the 2-barrel motors, you had to find the right kind of heads all the time and spend big money to have them go right to the limit of the rules.
And it hurt the little guys. And that's what Waterford was, a place for a little guy to go racing, a Ricky Young.
Looking to pull down into victory lane, it's Jerry Young from Canterbury driving the Ace Security Bestwick Signs Coastal Marine sponsor number 33.
It's gonna be Codyville from now on. Larry won 2 weeks ago. Conrad won last week. How about it, ladies and gentlemen? It's big winner, Ron Curry.
I didn't go that much. You know, I played sports in school, and it wasn't until my late teens or early 20s where I decided that I wanted to get more involved in racing. Z-Rock, the radio station, was the sponsor. 125 laps. I think I led maybe 120 laps of it. All I know is that I'm pretty sure I started in the top 3 or 4, and I got into the lead pretty quick, and then there was the fire.
Keep in mind, 125 laps is a long way to go, but nobody wants to lose sight of the leaders. All the heavy hitters mired down in traffic about halfway up. Bill Rondeau on the move. He's working the inside groove. Gada in the 81 car, running into some type of problem. He's on the outside, and that's not the place you want to be. Problems up front, Jimmy Broderick, Vinny Anglaise. Oh, a whole bunch of cars getting balled up here on the front stretch.
I was sitting with my wife, and Danny was only 2 years old then, and he comes spinning around, and it was Lamphere, hit him from behind, and it was kind of nothing. We all sat there for a second. You could see Dennis getting unbuckled.
I think it was Dennis Gada and Mark Longinesse and maybe Larry Lamphere.
And I think it was Larry Lamphere's car had the fuel cell broke somehow, and there was fuel everywhere, and of course nobody knew it.
And when I hit Larry, rear bumper to rear bumper, the fuel cell got cut right through the tin, right through the bladder, and it all came gushing out under his car and under my car.
I remember that once it all stopped, I believe it was one of the Gadas fired up his car to drive away, and that's what started the inferno.
When Dennis tried to start his car, it just went off, and it was, you know, how you get that whoop, and it was on.
We've got a couple of cars on fire as Larry Lamphere is number 12, and as you can see, evidently the fuel cell in car number 12 has erupted.
I don't know, the great fear that you have when you see it in the fire.
Fire is real scary stuff in race cars. I mean, especially if somebody can't get out.
Fire is your worst enemy when it comes to racing, and that was real fire.
There was nothing we could do. It was all Cohansey. Get the guy out of the car. Forget the fire. Get the guy out of the car.
Scary, you know, because I never saw really Larry Lamphere get out of the car, and I think I did see Gada get out of the car.
I must have been about 30 feet away, and watching Longinesse running through the fire to go pull Dennis out. I thought, you know, pretty heroic on Mark's part.
Mark Longinesse we were left front to left front, basically. And he was right there telling me, help me get out of there.
And myself and Dennis Gada, we were stuck there. We got out just in time when it really got big.
I think I was in the press box, Yeah, I was. You know, time just slows down when those things happen. So it seemed like it took a half an hour for the fire department to get water on that thing.
I was on the flag stand with, I want to say it was Danny.
Yeah, I was on the flag stand.
You were on the flag
I
stand?
was.
Wow.
And I felt it. I felt it.
It was probably 50 to 60 feet away from the flag stand. It was really, it was pretty intense.
My first concern was, of course, for the safety of everybody. You know, God, please don't let anybody get killed or burn or whatever else.
I was standing in the pits at that time in turn 1, and I couldn't believe that nobody was harmed.
And I was sitting there in the wreck, and the next thing I remember is the back of my head getting hot. And I'm sitting there, and it's like, I'm hitting the switch, and it's like, come on, start, woman! I drove on it. I can still remember that.
Ladies and gentlemen, kindly step back away from the fence. As you can see, the boys from Cohansey are right there. The fire will be contained on the racetrack.
Well, you know, you say that, you know, every time a car hits the wall on the front stretch, you know, and usually it's nothing, but, you know, this was a real fire. You know, so it really was a big deal, and we really did need, you know, the kids to stay away for once.
I had gotten down off the flag stand, gone into the grandstands. I was trying to get people away, to move away from the fence.
The winds were blowing the flames through the fence and into the grandstand.
And getting back away from the fence area. Ladies and gentlemen, take your time. Go easy, but get away from the area of the fire.
And the track crew trying to put the fire out, and it just seemed like they were pushing the fire, you know, like it was spreading out.
It was hot. You could probably roast a hot dog from when I was sitting in it, you know. We sat down, like you said, coming down to turn 4, and it happened front stretch right there, right in front of us.
And you literally feel the heat come up and hit you.
It was a huge fire. She started to run up the stands. We still talk about it to this day. She started to run up the stands, and I grabbed the kid out of her hands and ran kind of around the crowd and out of the stands because it was a big fire. It was pretty scary.
This is why, in the case of every fire, we ask you to back off and get out of the way as soon as possible. That's for your own safety and well-being. And as you can see, the boys from Cohansey have things pretty well beaten down.
I don't think I went that night.
Really?
But obviously I heard about it.
Yeah.
So the very next morning, I went up to the Gadas, and I was standing next to the car with Dennis just looking at it.
Was your car junk after that?
Car wasn't that bad, really. If I could have driven it away, it probably would have been in much better shape. Having left it there, just, you know, melted a bunch of stuff in the back of it.
The thing I remember is all the roll cage padding had melted down into like curtains.
But it didn't really hurt much in my car. Obviously, I needed a fuel cell, but the rear end was okay. The chassis wasn't bent.
And I remember just looking at it and saying, so what are you going to do? He's like, I'm going to fix it. I was like, really? This thing's crispy.
So we came back the next race.
Came back the next race with the same car?
Yeah.
Larry Lanfear's car was, you know, literally fried. I mean, it was burnt to a crisp.
Yeah, Larry Lanfear totally lost his car.
I took a walk down into the infield at the end of the night to check out Larry's car, and it just kind of looked like a car that had been deep in the woods forever. There was nothing left of that car. It was just completely charred, and it was just an amazing sight.
I think it took everyone by surprise. You know, make sure no one in the stands got hurt, but the fire crew was just in shock what they saw, and I don't think they really knew how to handle something like that at the time. I mean, I'm sure it would be different today.
I think we all learned a little something about being prepared for the big one.
Ever since that fire, Cohansey's got foam now. They never had foam prior to that.
Really?
Yeah. You know, actually, if you look at the stuff that Cohansey has now, it's really top shelf compared to whatever footage you've seen. I'm sure you could tell the difference now. Because that was scary. That was a big deal.
That could have been really bad for a lot of people, and thankfully it wasn't.
Yeah, that was a nasty crash. That was a really scary. That was probably the worst fire I think I ever saw in a race car.
Yeah, those guys were pretty lucky that night.
As a driver, that's one of those things that I try to forget that I saw because it was that ugly. And I'm just thankful that, you know, we're not talking about a different story as to what happened that day.
Well, I was there in '94 as the PR director, which basically back then meant that you got the releases out weekly and you ran the souvenir program book and you sold sponsorships. So it really gave me an opportunity to meet a lot of people around the track.
Gary was sales marketing, get some monies in here through MJ, Valenti, car dealers, machine shops, whoever. And that was his job.
The partnership group, Waterford Sports Center, largely John Holstein, he was pressuring to try to either get the people he had at least to perform better. And I got involved in sort of looking over the shoulder of the tenant to see how he was doing.
It got a little bit involved where he went a little bit beyond what he was supposed to do. And that's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, and you know, hindsight, obviously, and now we're over 20 years removed, you know, from that. It was not obviously the best decision, but the way I look at it, just in our overall life experience, that just was one cog in the 1994, you know, wheel, if you will, that eventually, you know, that forced us out, but eventually caused us to give it up. You know, and you know, I can understand why there's certain person might be a little upset about that, and probably rightfully so, because you know, it was not what we had hoped it would be.
What happens, I mean, if you're a family like that and you really like racing, again, nobody knew who they were, but they obviously knew about Waterford. I mean, you go and you see, man, this is fun. You know, we want to do that. Now we're financially able to take the place over, and maybe we're just what this place needs. And they were for a while, but you know, now all of a sudden this neighbor's mad at you, that neighbor's mad at you. You realize the 1,000,001 things that go into running a Saturday night that you didn't know when you were just sitting in the grandstands. Now it becomes a hassle that you're spending a lot of money on. So I think that's why these promotional stays don't always last that long.
I felt sorry because George is a real good guy to work for. I mean, real good guy to work for. Well, you could see that they were starting to have money problems for whatever reason.
The casinos came into town and took away my entertainment dollar.
You're fighting to get somebody to your facility who has 20 other things they can do. And that wasn't like that when I was racing back in the street stock days, the super stock days. There was nothing going on in town. Everybody in the neighborhood wanted to go to the racetrack. Now, you have the casinos, you know, just sports venues. Things are a lot more popular now, and every entertainment venue in the area is pulling people that potentially could have been a race fan. And now they're not. And even some of the diehard, hardcore race fans miss weeks where they go do other things. They go to Pocono, they go to Dover, they go to New Hampshire.
It wasn't only the crowd, it was the car counts. The car counts really started to dwindle. And in '94, I mean, we were down to, you know, under 15, 16 modifieds a week. Late miles were already dwindling. The lesser divisions were still pretty strong. But the divisions where you have to spend, you know, I think spend more money to race every week were dwindling, and just the economy itself. I mean, that was the recession. I mean, it hit us hard.
You know, he had a lease that went well beyond 1994, but he basically turned the keys to the place back over to the ownership group at the end of '94.
After a good amount of effort, I think we earned the respect of the competitors and the car owners. I'm not ashamed to say at all that we're Christians, and I think they knew that. For example, if a driver would come up to me and just go cussing this, that, and the other thing.
The first foul word that come out of your mouth, end of the conversation, walk the other way. Doesn't need it, doesn't want it, wasn't going to take it.
I'd stop them and say, you talk in a civil tone, and we'll have the conversation. So I think that was important to us, at least it was to me. Secondly was, I think just the fact that we were able to keep families coming together, not only Saturday nights, but when we do the family fun nights on Sunday. We didn't serve beer. The admission was only $5, and we put on what we thought was a pretty good show, and a lot of families, a lot of young kids came, which we hoped would translate into a regular Saturday night as well. And the last thing is, and again, with no disrespect to the modifieds, just the late models were just really special, and just the tremendous racing they did over the years.
My best memory would be I got into a race using Tasso's car, and I come in first and got my trophy.
My memories are much more on the fun side. I'd show up and we'd have a guy that jumps cars on roller skates. So he'd pop the trunk, he'd hook his rope, and he'd say, I need you to go 22 miles an hour. I'm going to jump the cars. And I'm like, shouldn't there be a driver here that does that for you? So I get to do stuff like that.
I think those 7 years were we had a blast. I think it brought us three closer together, where Wayne and I are very different. We like different things. We obviously look very different. However, when it came to the Speedbowl, we were all a team, and I thought that was kind of cool.
Some of the angst I think that's developed, off and on over the years, like with Harvey, you didn't really have that I can recall with the KORTEWEG'S. I mean, you had that town issue, but I think they tried to solve that.
I think they were good to the fans. They were certainly good to the drivers and the teams. I mean, they were personable people.
They were a good family. They really did a good job at the Speedbowl. It was a lot of fun back then.
It was a family-run racetrack, and literally the whole family worked there. And they were just good people. I mean, they were good for that racetrack. And I'm convinced that if we didn't have the KORTEWEG era, that track might not be here.
It was sort of disappointing to me, in a sense, to see them leave when they left.
I wish it went longer.
Yeah.
I wish it went longer. I think we were just getting started.
Yep.
Really, And I think just unfortunately circumstances, some within our control, some outside of our control, it's just felt the end. Yeah, I would love to have stayed with it longer. It was a good run, and we're grateful we had the opportunity to do it.
Back then, there was regime changes constantly. You had Stafford for that short period of time. You had KORTEWEG'S for a short period of time. The stability just wasn't there. So everybody was kind of numb to that. So I think when Terry came in, I think there was people, geez, how long is he going to be here? Or, everybody was just waiting for a change or to see what kind of changes there were going to be.